Welcome back to America's Forum. I'm J.D. Hayworth.
And I'm John Bachman. It's good to have everyone back with us here. Right now we want to bring in Newsmax TV's Andy Tillis, who's here with us to talk also about a concerning new study that takes a look at the suicidal tendencies of our military members.
Yes, thank you, John. This study comes amid growing alarm that the rate of suicide among members of the military is progressively worsening. Now, this comprised of 3 papers which focused on the cause of suicidal tendencies, and it said that they began to occur much earlier than people actually being deployed. Now, this surprising discovery was that about 1 in 10 soldiers qualified for a diagnosis of intermittent explosive disorder, and that's more than 5 times the amount found in the general population. It's this disorder, coupled with the stress of deployment, that increases the likelihood of troops acting on suicidal urges. The papers are a culmination of 5 years of work by academic, government, and military researchers who investigated hundreds of cases and surveyed thousands of active duty soldiers using anonymous questionnaires. The study began way back in 2008 when the suicide rate among active soldiers rose above the civilian rate for the first time. And it's worth pointing out that a quarter of the soldiers surveyed qualified for at least one current psychiatric disorder. So, do these suicidal tendencies begin in basic training, or are the suicidal tendencies linked to impulsive and aggressive behavior? How can the military identify those at risk? Should the military rethink its styling of training? There's a lot of issues here that we need to go through to see if this is really something that happens before they enlist or after they enlist, and a combination of the deployment and being in the service.
There's a lot of stress. Of course, this impacts the family members as well. There's just so much here. Now, was there anything in that study that kind of starts to answer those questions that you asked leading into this segment?
Well, I did read a lot of comments also that people were saying this wasn't a study conducted by the Army. This was a study that was conducted by Berkeley, Harvard, University of Michigan. So the Army had actually put into place some systems to try to identify people that had issues before they went into the Army. And now they're saying that they actually did a program. The Army had a program with 1.1 million members participating, and that they didn't see any great results from this.
We've read so much, heard so much about what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. And a lot of the experience of World War II veterans was to come home and, quote, just not talk about it. We had the slang at the time that permeated our language for so many years of being shell-shocked. How much of this is a growing sophistication in terms of classifying mental disorders and just the advances in mental health?
I want to go back to what you just said about World War II and World War I. When soldiers used to go fight those wars, they would come back to a hero's welcome. They won the war. They came back. They had supporters. Everybody was, yay, yay. They had parades. In this generation, there's no parade and there's no end. So when is the war over? There's no end in sight.
You know, I talked to a veteran of Iwo Jima, and he was talking about what happened after World War II, and he said he got on a boat and took a boat back to the United States, and it was in that long boat trip that he had a chance to decompress and talk to some of his fellow platoon members, and that was kind of some therapy for them. And now they come right back, they integrate into society, and things have changed so much in 3 months.
Well, and the other thing you mentioned, Andy, is the fact that we've had multiple deployments.
Yeah.
Our all-volunteer force has really been challenged. And imagine the notion of going into a theater of combat, then returning home stateside for a time, and then being redeployed. So that on again, off again is a situation that has to, I would think, exacerbate some of the challenges, the anxieties, and just the daily outlook of veterans.
I would relate it to a football game.
Yeah.
Say you play football and you go out and you're in the Super Bowl. So now you're playing in the Super Bowl. In the wars that we're having now, it's basically the team just gets off the field and leaves. There is no winner. There's no ring. There's no nothing. So I would imagine that's kind of depressing.
It would be interesting to see a study, the first Gulf War, the famous 100-hour war, where I believe U.S. News and World Report called it triumph without victory. But you will recall huge parades for the late General Schwarzkopf and that force.
Absolutely.
But again, with a decade-long involvement and no completion, no closure of this, it would be interesting to see a study of the first Gulf War veterans in terms of post-traumatic stress and the challenges they're facing.
Also interesting to
Agreed.
focus on what former President George W. Bush said last week, that we shouldn't call this post-traumatic stress disorder. We should recharacterize it as something else and take out the word disorder so there's not this stigma here, because as we heard JD just mention a few moments ago, it's difficult for these guys to talk about this. They have been in the war zone. They're the strong, silent types, and it's very hard for them to talk about this because there aren't a lot of folks here. We're talking about 1% or 1% of this population here in America. Not a lot of folks for them to talk about other than their own troop members.
And it's hard to tell if somebody has a mental disorder or is predispositioned to this disorder, because a lot of people that sign up for service, it's all, you can cover up a mental illness. If you want to serve, you can say the right things and not let people know that you are predispositioned to these outbursts or anger problems.
And yet at the same time, Andy, there's an outlook on life. For example, young men 18 to 21 and young women for that matter, who may feel the urge to go into the service, we all demographically have feelings at a younger age of indestructibility, invincibility.
Absolutely.
That's not a mental condition as much as it is an attitudinal,
Sure.
demographically
yep.
shared orientation that people have. So one danger I think we're going to have in this entire discussion is, where does the legitimate mental health issue begin and end? Is there a clear parameter here? And that's why, echoing what John had to say about former President Bush and talking about the imprimatur of a former president, no longer in the bully pulpit, but perhaps never more eloquent when he says, leave the word disorder out. It is post-traumatic stress condition. And that change, I think will have a sea change in this whole treatment and reception of our veterans coming home.
Yeah, and we heard as recently as yesterday, Rachel Maddow blame the situation in the Ukraine on President Bush, but a bold and brave decision for him to come out and take such a strong stance when it comes to post-traumatic stress condition, as we'll call it right now, the president's wishes, because there's a lot of resistance for him to talk about this thing, but his voice needs to be heard in this conversation.
Well, I will tell you, as a former member of Congress and with President Bush, 4 days before the midterm election in 2006, anytime he would make a visit, Andy, anywhere, both official and political, he would take time out and reach out to the families of the fallen. Now imagine how difficult it must be as Commander-in-Chief, and yes, we had a hand in casting votes, and I went to see some of our wounded guys in Bethesda, my constituents, going through treatments. But imagine the type of mindset that has to occur for the Commander-in-Chief to go sit for a half an hour to an hour's time with the bereaved and spend that time with them.
Can't be easy.
Yeah, the issues are real, the emotions very real as well. Great stuff here, and a concerning study, but very important. Andy,
He's
thanks
a great
so much.
man for doing it.
That's right.
Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for being with us, Andy. We have much more to talk about here. We want to hear from you. What do you think about this issue with the suicidal tendencies of our troops? Can we do more?